We're very pleased to be joining this track, talking about our initiatives in diversity. I run Gracenote. Meryl is the brains behind our inclusion analytics initiative. And so I'll start with a little bit of background on Gracenote and how we work and how we work with Nielsen data. And then I'll hand off to Meryl to walk through the product and all of the insights that we're now starting to derive. So Gracenote is, I guess, the premier provider of entertainment metadata. We power a lot of the consumer experiences that you interact with on a daily basis, be that with a cable or a satellite provider, with a streaming application, or with an IPTV set-top box. It's the core metadata, it's the information about the shows, who's in them, when they're on, how much they are, and then a lot more deep information that helps drive personalization and recommendations. So we do that on a global basis. We cover about 85 countries. We do it in 37 languages, and we power most of the major service providers, in Western Europe, in North America, in Latin America, in Australia and New Zealand, and in the Indian subcontinent. We have a business that is in video, in music. It also covers podcast information, and we also do sports statistics. We actually are powering the NBC Universal Olympics service that runs on their website that basically went live, I think, yesterday with the softball and baseball starts, and will be, very heavily used over the course of the coming 3 or 4 weeks. Gracenote was acquired by Nielsen in February 2017. And of course, if you consider that Gracenote knows the what is being watched, then Nielsen measures the who is watching it, and is obviously the powerhouse in ratings. And so basically what we are talking about today in terms of mining for gold within diversity data is a combination of those two data sets, the what from Gracenote and the who from Nielsen. And Meryl leads the group that takes that combination of data set to derive insights into what is happening. And our goal is really to help the content and distribution piece of the entertainment life cycle. So we historically have been driving the discovery side, but we want to move up the value chain and help with insights to help in terms of distribution, in terms of content production, in terms of acquisition, and in terms of sales. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Meryl. We're going to run a little bit of a video to show what Gracenote and the overall concept of what we hope to achieve. And then Meryl will deep dive into specifically our inclusion analytics product set.
All right, thanks everyone. So I wanted to talk to you today about Nielsen and Gracenote's most recent initiative to take a look at diversity data. We started this last summer in the midst of the conversation that we were having as a country around social and racial justice. And we know that we're sitting on a mountain of data about what's happening in content and what's happening in audiences, and particularly how this data can benefit the entire media ecosystem. So there are a couple of business trends that are really key to talk about right now. First of all, everyone knows that the calls across the media ecosystem for more inclusivity and diversity are heard wide and far, and many of you are stepping up to answer them. Our population is increasingly becoming more diverse, and we know that multicultural content or content that is relevant and resonates with diverse audiences is no longer niche, because our general market is a multicultural market. We know that what people see on television informs what they think of themselves and who they see around them, what they think of the people around them, their neighbors, their friends, and people they do not know. And it's important, and as we engage in a conversation about whether or not media is perpetuating harmful stereotypes and narratives, or whether or not it's combating those and moving society forward as a whole. We also know that audiences are actively seeking more inclusive content. We can see it in our audience data. People are dropping subscriptions, picking them up, moving around. And we know that platforms with strong representation that have diversity first as a strategy are seeing new viewers and gaining diverse viewers and gaining viewers from the general market as well. That is why last week we opened up to the full market Gracenote Inclusion Analytics, which is an expansive data set that covers insights about the diversity of on-screen talent compared with the diversity of audiences and the diversity of society at large. This data set gives us the opportunity to measure the gaps, because we know when you measure something and you understand the gap, it makes it actionable. We have data that now can help people inform their strategies so that they can make improvements and have impact on the industry. And together we will partner to make the media ecosystem more inclusive, because we know inclusion is the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. So let's jump into the data. What do we see in the data that we're producing? Inclusion Analytics is a data set that covers more than 750 programs every quarter, the most popular programming seen on broadcast, cable, and streaming TV. We focus on new and premiering content. We're looking at scripted, reality TV, news, a wide variety of programming formats, mostly new programs. And we measure the diversity of the leads in those programs, the lead recurring characters. And we measure diversity among racial and ethnic groups. We look at gender, and we look at sexual orientation, and we look at the intersectionality of all of those data points to really understand who's being seen on screen and who is not. So if we take a look at the results, we can see white people still command the lion's share of time on screen across the TV landscape, and that light blue bar on the left shows their share of screen. The blue bar on the right is their population estimate. So white people are showing up more frequently than they show up in the population on television. If we look at the next bar and we look at BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, we see that they are underrepresented, 32% share of screen versus being 40% of our population. If we continue, we can see that Black people do have strong representation. Asians are underrepresented. Hispanic Latinx is underrepresented. And the LGBTQ population appears to have strong representation, but this is a tricky category because there's so much pressure for people to not self-identify, either if they're in the industry, self-identifying as who they are from a talent perspective, or when they're answering census questionnaires and questionnaires about incidents in the population. Our population estimates for this sector are difficult to have at a fine degree of accuracy. And we know that these demographics are shifting.
Can I just interrupt? Because of where the black bar is, can you just walk people through what each of the bars are?
Oh goodness, you're actually seeing my, let's see if I can just hide it. Does that help?
That is fantastic. Yep.
So you can see white, BIPOC, which is our roll-up that includes all racial and ethnic minority groups, Hispanic, Latinx, underrepresented, Black, strong representation, and that's been growing and getting better. Asian and Pacific Islanders are underrepresented, and LGBTQ has representation, but we talked about the demographic shifts. We're going to jump to the next screen. Let's talk about women. So women are 52% of the population, and we've seen a big gain in share of screen for women. We're at 43%. That's up from 38% in 2019. So we're very excited to see that gain. It's still disappointing to see what a big gap there is. When we think about representation for women and we look across racial and ethnic minorities, it gets even worse, because when you're already underrepresented as a person of color on television, and then you're underrepresented as a woman, that's sort of a double whammy. LGBTQ women as well are less likely to be seen on screen than men. So there's some big gaps there. The largest gap is actually between white women and white men on screen. White men have 12% more share of screen than white women on screen. That's actually one of the biggest gaps among all the ethnic groups. So let's look at Hispanic Latinx representation. 19% of the population, Hispanics are the largest minority group demographic in our country. 6% share of screen. So that means there's a huge gulf between where we see Latinx people in our society and how they're showing up in television content. If we look at Spanish language programming, that does go up to 12%, but for those who are not watching Spanish language content, they only have an opportunity, a 6% share of screen, very few opportunities to engage with Latinx Hispanic characters and stories, and to understand this group that is such a big percentage of our society. Let's look at Asians. This is the fastest growing minority population in the US, and they have a very low visibility, very low share of screen, 4%. And that's actually lower than it was in 2019. Asians are huge drivers of culture, are having huge impact on pop culture outside of the TV realm. Virtually, very little representation showing up in mainstream TV content, and Asians are not engaging in mainstream television content either. They're finding their content in other places. Asians are more likely than any other group in the Nielsen dataset to find content outside of the TV, broadcast, linear, and traditional streaming landscape. When we think about representation from a genre view, and we look at our metadata, we can look at what are the top genres for representation by platform, and it really varies a lot. On broadcast, the top genre for people of color is reality, and that has a lot more representation than reality programs on other platforms. On cable, we're seeing sitcom as the top genre for representation for people of color. And on streaming, the top genre is drama. Now, sitcom and drama have pretty strong representation across the board, but you really see some big variances when you start digging into news, politics, documentaries. It's not only important to look at who is showing up in television content and how is diversity present from a talent perspective, but also what's happening in the content. With the Grace Note video descriptor data set, we can dig in and look at the themes that are present in content to really understand whether or not stereotypes are surfacing. So when we look at programs that have a high share of screen for women, we split them into programs that had a high share of screen for white women versus women of color. And you can see some of the unique themes that were popping for each identity group. For white women, themes of husbands and love and family and friendship show up. And for women of color, themes of melodrama, dysfunction, and rivalry show up. But the programs that really resonate do not reveal these stereotypes. We looked at one of the most popular programs on television that had really high engagement from women of color. And we saw that the themes there were hilarious, thought-provoking, romantic comedy. So really, if you are acquiring content or you're creating content, it's important to be looking at what are the themes that are present. How does that compare to what's available in the marketplace? And what role do you have in changing those narratives that are out there? So let's take a look at how does this translate into audiences? What are audiences doing? And specifically, what's happening with diverse audiences? If you look at the bar on the left shows us the total US TV population. So you can see the blue bar is white people at 63%. The yellow bar is Asians at 5%. The red bar is Black viewers at 13%. And the purple bar is Hispanic viewers at 17%. When we then move to the next bar, we look at, okay, who's watching cable and broadcast? And we can see that Hispanic viewers are less likely to be watching cable and broadcast than television overall. Black people are more likely to be watching cable and broadcast. Asians are less likely to be found there. White people are more likely to be found there. If we move to the next bar to look at total streaming, we can see white people are slightly less likely to be watching streaming. Asians are more likely to be watching streaming than linear programming. Black people are as likely to watch streaming content as cable and broadcast. And Hispanic viewers are more likely to be watching streaming content than cable and broadcast. Now let's look at the top streaming providers. We can see that Black people are really leaning in with Amazon Prime Video and Hulu. We see that Asian people are flocking to Netflix. And we see that Netflix also has very high Hispanic viewership, same with Disney at 15% and Netflix at 21%. Streaming is growing every quarter. It's getting bigger and bigger. And now I want to talk about the fastest growing sector of streaming video, and that's ad-supported video on demand. It's driving incredible diversity. If you look at some of these networks, Pluto and Tubi are driving a 30 and 40% share of audience for Black audience. If you look at YouTube, they're commanding 21% of the audience is Hispanic. Asians are also flocking to Roku and YouTube and finding content on these platforms that resonate, that they enjoy. If you're a content creator and you're focused on creating content for diverse audiences, make sure that ad-supported video on demand is part of your distribution strategy because the audience is there and it's growing rapidly. So let's talk about the bottom line and the business impact. Diverse content is an opportunity. There's so much opportunity to bring more people into television, to represent more people, to bring them into stories. And that translates into higher viewership. We did a study and took a look at a top program on a major network that had a high Hispanic Latinx share of screen. This particular program drew 2% incremental reach. It brought 2% new viewers to the network who didn't watch anything else on this network. They just showed up for this one program. And 2% may not seem like a big number, but it drove 17 million unique viewers to this network who were only coming to watch that program. And we know some of those viewers were coming, were Latinx and Hispanic. That audience was 3% higher Latinx and Hispanic share of audience for that program than the network average for all of their other programs. So this is an opportunity to really engage more people in content. This is a growth strategy and a driver of growth. Imagine how many more people would be leaning into content if they had an opportunity to see themselves, to see stories that resonate, to see stories that uplift, and to see stories that are exciting. Thank you so much for coming to the talk. Sorry for the technical glitches, but I think we have an opportunity to answer some questions, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, I'll go ahead and look at the chat and see if we've got any questions coming in.
Thanks very much, Meryl. I actually had a question for you. It was a fascinating presentation. Just looking at the amount of data that you have there is quite incredible. So is this service, is it available worldwide? Is it just in the United States at the moment?
Well, we just opened up the data to the full market last week, and it is available in the US for now. Now, of course, a lot of these programs do cross borders, so the data is relevant to global, to global audiences. But right now, we've launched in the US. We will be expanding internationally next year.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you know, particularly during the pandemic, we seem to have seen that a lot of audience are tuning into content outside of their own territory and getting into drama series or comedy series from other countries. So yeah, that's a really good point. And what about you know, the actual diversity of the workforce? So, you know, looking at those who are behind the camera, working in the production, or camera operators. I mean, how does this feed into this whole narrative?
That's a great question. We will be adding in kind of behind the screen and below the line data coming soon. By the end of the year, we'll have that creator view available for you. But that's an area of big focus right now, as well as executives in the companies. Anybody who's involved in deciding what content can come to market, or providing even feedback and notes to the creators as shows are running, making sure that diversity is present all the way throughout the pipeline, from greenlighting and creation to actually creating the content and the production, to the feedback that is, you know, that is informing what direction the creative goes, to the folks who are acquiring content and library content and distributing it. Diversity needs to be present throughout the ecosystem. And there are some fantastic groups that are really working and partnering on developing those talent pipelines. There are organizations like Array Crew that are now making it easier for people to identify diverse talent. Even our studio system product is a place where you can actually go and find lists of diverse creators and diverse crew for staffing on your productions. So there's a lot of resources and a lot of data, and people just have to decide that this is something that they care about and they're committed to. And there are partners and data out there to help them, you know, improve their strategies.
Yeah, and I would add, I think it's important that we have verified data, especially when you're looking at gender identification, to make sure that we are really representing how people are representing themselves. And so a lot of work is going in to make sure that it's not just one source of information that we use, but we triangulate and validate the sources to make sure that we have the broadest set of validated data that we can find.